Welcome to Space Drift. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The world is watching a dangerous game unfold as the US-China trade conflict escalates in 2025. Years of disputes over trade, technology, and global influence have led to this moment. The Trump administration's tariffs aim to bring manufacturing back to the US and punish China's trade practices. China responded with its own tariffs and strategic moves, fueling global uncertainty. This year, the US pushed NATO and G7 allies to stop buying Russian oil and impose steep tariffs on Chinese goods. The EU's $750 billion deal to buy US oil and gas was seen as a win for Washington, but it cornered Beijing. Tensions soared as high-level negotiations failed to restore trust. Each side accused the other of economic aggression and unfair practices. The mistrust set the stage for China's boldest move yet, interfering with US oil shipments. This was no minor trade spat. It was a direct challenge to America's energy dominance. The trade war had now entered the critical domain of global energy security. China's action transformed the conflict into a full-blown geopolitical crisis. The consequences are only beginning to be understood by governments, businesses, and ordinary people worldwide. The world stands on the edge of a new era of economic warfare. China's unprecedented blockade was triggered by American pressure and threats to its energy security. The US threatened sanctions on any country buying Russian oil, doubling tariffs on Indian goods as a warning. China saw this as a direct threat to its sovereignty and economic lifeline. Beijing opposes unilateral sanctions and insists on the right to choose its trading partners. The US-EU energy alliance, solidified by the massive oil deal, left China feeling encircled. Blocking US oil shipments was a calculated move to disrupt this new energy order. China wanted to show the world that US dominance in energy markets was not absolute. The blockade was a strategic response to years of escalating pressure. China's goal: force the US to negotiate on equal terms. This was a high-risk strategy, signaling the end of unchallenged American economic dominance. The global balance of power was shifting. By blocking US oil to 150 countries, China aimed to inflict economic pain and demonstrate its power. The US oil boom had fueled growth and jobs. China's move threatened this engine. Beijing hoped internal US pressure would force a policy shift. China also wanted to prove it could disrupt global supply chains, challenging decades of US naval dominance. Using its shipping fleet and naval presence, China showed it could halt global trade if provoked. The blockade tested the loyalty of America's allies, many of whom now faced energy crises. China bet that these countries would pressure Washington to de-escalate. The move also opened doors for other oil producers like Russia and Middle Eastern nations to gain market share. China was rewiring the global energy map to its advantage. The gamble risked global condemnation, but matched the scale of US pressure. Beijing believed only a bold, transformative response could shift the balance. The world was forced to reckon with China's new role as a disruptor. The stakes had never been higher. The US condemned the blockade as economic piracy and vowed a strong response. Military action was deemed too risky, so Washington turned to diplomatic pressure and threats of new sanctions. America's allies were divided, dependent on US security but now facing an energy crisis. Japan, South Korea, and the EU called for urgent dialogue, realizing their new energy supply was vulnerable. Oil-producing nations like Russia saw an opportunity to expand their influence. India defended its right to buy energy from any source, a stance gaining sympathy worldwide. The crisis split the world, some sided with the US, others with China, and many tried to protect their own interests. Markets panicked, oil prices soared, stocks tumbled, and shipping companies faced chaos. Global supply chains were thrown into disarray. The blockade exposed the fragility of globalization and the risks of geopolitical conflict. The world economy was entering uncharted territory. China's oil blockade sent shockwaves through global energy markets. Oil prices surged over 40% in days, raising costs for transportation, manufacturing, and everyday goods. Airlines cut routes and businesses faced higher expenses across the board. The US oil sector ground to a halt, causing job losses and slashing government revenue. The Trump administration's tariff-funded bailouts were now in jeopardy. International trade suffered as shipping risks and insurance costs soared. Industries from Swiss watches to Japanese exports faced new bottlenecks and delays. Companies began rethinking global supply chains, accelerating economic decoupling. Some firms pulled out of China, others doubled down on US investments to avoid tariffs. The world economy was fragmenting into competing blocks. Decades of integration were being reversed, replaced by inefficiency and higher costs. Consumers everywhere felt the pain. The blockade was forcing a messy, expensive reordering of the global economy. The trade war and oil blockade hit ordinary people hardest. American farmers, once reliant on China for exports, faced bankruptcy as prices collapsed and debts mounted. The government's bailout plans faltered, leaving rural communities desperate. Energy sector workers lost jobs as oil production and shipping halted. The pain rippled through logistics, manufacturing, and retail, slowing consumer spending and deepening recession fears. Globally, the cost of living soared. Fuel, food, and basic goods became unaffordable for many. Developing nations faced the worst hardship, forced to choose between subsidies and public unrest. The conflict sparked a humanitarian crisis for millions with no voice in the dispute. Anxiety and uncertainty spread as families struggled to pay bills and feared for the future. The dream of a peaceful, connected world was unraveling. The human cost of this economic war was measured in lost livelihoods and shattered hopes. Decisions in Washington and Beijing were reshaping lives everywhere. In September 2025, the world stands at a crossroads. One path leads to further escalation: US counter-blockades, financial sanctions, and even military confrontation. Such moves could devastate the global economy and risk open conflict. China would likely retaliate, raising the specter of a direct clash in the South China Sea or Taiwan Strait. Another path is de-escalation, with both sides under pressure to negotiate a diplomatic solution. The upcoming Madrid talks are now critical. A breakthrough could involve mutual tariff rollbacks and an end to the blockade. This would require political courage and compromise. A third scenario is a prolonged stalemate, dividing the world into rival blocs and creating a new Cold War fought with economic and technological weapons. Global supply chains would be permanently altered, and countries forced to choose sides. The US Supreme Court's upcoming tariff case and pressure from allies add new dimensions to the crisis. The world watches, hoping leaders can find an off-ramp from disaster. The choices made now will shape the global order for generations. The world holds its breath, hoping wisdom prevails.